All right, now what? Now what? Now what? I saw that. I thought that was funny. You know, that is the picture of what we call persevering. You know, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to quit. And I talked about this last week. I've got some more information. We're working ourselves up to the big Super Bowl Sunday sermon. If you've never been here, we're going to have fun on that day. So we've been talking about now what? What do you do when there's nothing else you can do and you find yourself in one of these moments of your life? You know, your health is failing. You've gone to the doctor. They've pretty much given you all the medication they can give you. They've done everything they can do, and this is kind of your new normal. What do you do when you have relationship problems, you know, whether, you know, it's coming home and you're not sure which version of him or her you're going to run into? And, you know, what do you do when there's nothing you can do, when your finances are just a struggle and you really don't see a way out of your current debt? What do you do? What do you do when you find yourself alone? There's a lot of people that are alone out there. There are a couple things you can do when there's nothing you can do. You can leave. You can leave the marriage. You can leave the family. You can leave the kids. You can quit. That's a good thing. You know, when there's nothing else you can do in these now what moments, you can just quit. You know, quit the job, quit the school, quit the team. You can quit God, quit church. You can give up. Giving up is always fun, right? Give up on that promotion. You're never going to get it. Give up on your health. Give up on your future. This is just the way it's going to be. Or you could decide to do what that little pig did. You could decide to persevere. Persevere. This is the actual definition of it. I love it. To continue on, even in the face of great difficulty, with little or no prospect of success. Like, who wants to do that, right? So, what's it going to be? Is it going to be give up, quit, leave? I don't know about you. I do know about you. We don't like stories where people give up. We don't like movies. We don't like books where people just quit or they give up or they leave. We hate those kind of stories. They don't inspire us, right? We like the stories where people persevere, where people, despite great odds, took on the challenge and kept fighting until they got through it. Those are the stories that we cheer for. Those are the movies we want to go and see, right? I told you this before. One of my favorite movies growing up was Rocky, the first one, not Rocky 14, but Rocky 1. Rocky 1, I remember I was downtown around Burnett Road in Austin at the Americana Theater. Anybody remember that theater? Big theater, beautiful theater. Went and saw Rocky. And I remember, the whole audience, we're all, when we're coming out, we're all humming that. Come on, y'all know it. We all wanted that. We want, what a great underdog story. Somebody who didn't give up. It was like, I'm going to be like that. I'm going to get in shape. And that's what I did, man. The next day, man, I'm like, I'm cracking the 2 raw eggs. I'm drinking them. Did y'all ever drink raw eggs? I tried it once, never again. I started jogging. 1 mile. What are y'all laughing at? I did. I lived on Mucky Road over here in Elgin, and I started jogging. 1 mile. If you went down there and back, that was 2 miles. So like, I got up to like 4 miles, and then I developed shin splints. And they're very painful. I went to the doctor. He says, well, that's very hard on your legs to run like that. So, hey, I quit. You like that story? Did that inspire you? Is that the kind of story we want to hear? No, we want to hear stories where the person didn't quit. We want to hear the stories where people don't give up. Those are the stories that inspire you. Those are the stories that make life worth living, right? Those are the stories we want to hear about. Being cut from the basketball team. I mean, this guy was cut from the basketball team, went home, in his room, cried, but decided he was going to go back every day until he got put back on that team. And he finally made it. His name was Michael Jordan. That's the story I like to hear. This kid did not speak until he was 4 years old. His parents were told by doctors there was something probably wrong with him. He would grow up to be Albert Einstein, world-known physicist, Nobel Prize winner. This next woman was demoted from her job as a television news anchor. She was told that she wasn't a good fit for television. You know her as Oprah Winfrey. And we're here today, we're worshiping Jesus Christ because of the men, hundreds and hundreds of men and women in the first century who decided not to give up. Here's just some of their names. Men and women. They decided not to give up despite great odds, despite the Roman Emperor Nero, which we've talked about many times, despite the fact that many of them were being persecuted and fed to lions and lit on fire and killed and murdered, kids taken away from their families. Despite all this, these men and women decided, you know what, we're not going to leave, we're not going to give up, we're not going to quit, we're going to persevere. We're going to continue to share the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're going to continue to tell the world what God has done here in Jerusalem. They saw Jesus crucified, and then they saw him resurrected. And they decided that no matter what was going to happen to them in their life, they were not going to give up telling that story. No matter how many would die, no matter how many would be fed to lions. Peter, James, John, Andrew, Bartholomew. There's a lot of Jameses. James the Younger, Thaddeus, man. James, I like so many James. James, the brother of Jesus. I love to talk about him. James, the brother of Jesus. Because one of the things that we say here is, what would it take to convince your brother that you're the Son of God? Right? What would it take? I love just, you know, and if you've been coming here a while, you know I say that all the time. Let me give you a little background on James, if you don't know anything about James, the little brother of Jesus. He was the second oldest, right after Jesus, the son of Mary and Joseph. And we're not sure, because it's not in our Bible. We do know that Mary at the cross, there's no Joseph. We know that during Jesus' ministry, we don't hear about Joseph, his earthly dad, anymore. And so we surmise that somewhere in the teen years of Jesus and James's life, their earthly father, Joseph, must have died. That's all we can discern from that information. And if you know anything about Jewish families, especially in the first century there, when the man of the house dies, the household responsibilities fall to the eldest son. In this case, it would be Jesus. And so Jesus was head of the household. He was responsible for his mom. He was responsible for James. He was responsible for his sisters, his family, for running the family business. But then when Jesus gets around 30 years old, and you know this, he leaves the family. He leaves Nazareth. He says he's got a great mission, a great ministry that he has to now go do. That he's done the family thing, and now he's got to go do his thing, his God thing, what he's been called to do. And we hear that story, and we go, that's a great story. But in reality, when Jesus decides to leave the family, that means that he's being irresponsible as a Jewish eldest son. He's going to say, you know what, I'm not going to take care of the family anymore. I'm not going to take care of mom and James. It's going to fall to the next eldest son, which is James. And so it's hard for us to know. We don't talk about this a lot at church, but James did not like his older brother, Jesus, because Jesus left the family. And all the responsibility fell on him. And you can read in Scripture where the whole town knew about it, all of Nazareth. Matter of fact, Jesus says he felt uncomfortable going back to his own hometown, that he was rejected by his own hometown because they knew what he had done. He'd left the family. Of course, not only did he leave the family, James and the other siblings would get word how Jesus was out there, and he was telling people that he was the Messiah. He told this woman at the well, a Samaritan, that they don't even talk, that he was the Messiah. He told other people that he was the Son of God. And so not only did James think Jesus was a bad son by leaving the family, he also thought his older brother had lost his mind, was a little crazy. And so let me be clear, if you don't know anything about James, he was not one of the original 12 disciples. No, he didn't. He couldn't go. He had to take care of the family. James did not support what Jesus was out there doing in his 3-year ministry. Did not support it. James did not see any of Jesus' miracles. He didn't see him feed the 5,000. He didn't see him walk on water. He didn't see him turn the water into wine. James wasn't there to hear Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, blessed all the poor, right? James was not even there when they arrested Jesus. Prior to Jesus being arrested, though, James and the family and Mother Mary, they would all head to the city to try to bring Jesus back because they had gotten word that Jesus was probably getting in trouble. He was getting in trouble with the religious people. He was getting in trouble with the emperor, the Rome, Empire of Rome, Pilate, the whole 9 yards. And so James and the family tried to go rescue Jesus to bring him home to Nazareth. You can read all about that in Mark chapter 3, starting around verse 20 when you get home today. And when he gets there and they're pleading for Jesus to come out and talk to him, they just want to get him home. They know Jesus is going to get killed. He's going to get himself killed if he doesn't come home. Even though he didn't like his brother, even though he thought his brother was irresponsible, even though he thought his brother was a little off in the head, he still loved his brother. And he wanted to bring him home, get him some help. But Jesus, if you read the story, refused to even talk to him. Refused to go out and talk to the family. James wasn't there when Jesus was arrested, and he wasn't there when Jesus was crucified. Tradition tells us in some other ancient texts that James, shortly after the crucifixion, Jesus got word and traveled to Jerusalem. Right? He still cared about his brother. And so he went to Jerusalem. And while James was in Jerusalem, something must have happened. Something amazing must have happened, because James, the brother of Jesus, suddenly started thinking of his brother as his Lord. And the only thing that I could imagine happened to James was that he ran into his dead brother who was now alive. It's the only thing that could possibly explain how you convince your little brother that you're the Son of God. James would become one of the leaders, primary leaders of the church in Jerusalem. He would become the first bishop of Jerusalem. He would serve under Nero, under persecution, under his friends being arrested and killed for 30 years, under the pressure of the religious temple leaders, still convinced that Jesus was not the Messiah, that any kind of preaching like that out there was pure blasphemy. James would continue to share Christ, continue to share the story of his brother. He would write it down in a letter. Eventually, the religious leaders, the same exact religious guys that had Jesus arrested, crucified, finally came to James after serving for 30 years, persevering. Despite great odds, they came to James and said, if you do not renounce your brother Jesus as the Messiah, then you are going to die. We are going to have you killed. And we're told that James refused to renounce Jesus as his Lord. What would it take for your younger brother to be convinced that you are the Son of God? Ancient text tells us that they took James, who refused to renounce Jesus, to the top of the Temple Mount wall, which was about 100 feet off the ground, and they pushed him off. The fall didn't kill him. Final blows came when people gathered around his broken body at the base of that wall, and they stoned him to death. So whether you believe in Jesus or not, whether you're just visiting and you're going, I need to, I just want to see what this Jesus is all about. James, his little brother, believed. And he would ultimately give his life for that belief. James would write us a letter before all this would happen. And it's so beautiful, and there's a lot of things you could be reading, but it's not a very long letter. It's in our New Testament. And we gave it a really cool name so you'd never forget what it's called. We just call it James. And you can read all about James. And he starts by declaring Jesus as his Lord, if you open to James chapter 1, verse 1. And then when he starts in verse 2, he wants to give us some information that can be helpful for us to get through our now what moments. When we're in a point in our life where we can't see how we can get out of whatever we're in, when there's nothing else that we can do, James is going to give us advice on what we can do in those moments. And the first advice, you're not going to like it. And this is what he says. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Now, this is where most people who come to church go, see you later, you crazy church people. I'm out of here. This is where people go, I don't think that's good advice. I don't like that. I don't know about you. I've never told anybody this, that I see are hurting, that are in pain. I've never walked up and go, wow, you look like you broke your arm. You got a big bone sticking out of it. You know what you should do? You should consider that pure joy. I think they would hurt me with their broke arm. I don't know. Would you do that? Hey, I heard, that terrible, you should consider that pure joy. Oh, I heard you got cancer. You should consider that pure joy. Really? This is why the outside world goes, what are these crazy Christians talking about? Right? Consider it. He's like, yeah, when bad things happen in your life and you feel like telling God to take a hike, before you do that, I want you to consider a different way of looking at it. Instead of considering it as a terrible thing, I'll never be happy again, life's never going to get any better, James says, I want you to consider, just for a moment, that God might be trying to do something good. How can cancer be good? How can this death be good? How can any of this be good? He says, I want you to consider, though. Just consider it. Because, he says, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And it's not a word we use all the time, but we know it's a word we don't want. We don't like it. I'd rather just, be good, have some money, not have to persevere anything. How about you? Right? We don't want to persevere. But James tells us something we already know, and we don't like to talk about it. He says, when you hit a bump in life, when they're struggling, James admits, when things go bad in your life, it's going to test your faith, okay? Can we admit that? When bad things are happening in your life, it's going to test your faith, right? And we know that's true, right? Trials make us look up to heaven and go, are you kidding me? How many have done that? Are you kidding me? Really? James, he says, look, I've lived through it. I've lived under Nero. I've seen my friends drug off and killed. I've seen some of my family drug off and fed to lions. I know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you, I know what it means to have your faith tested. Okay? But if you choose to continue to trust in a loving and good God, it's in the end going to produce a persevering kind of faith in your world. A persevering faith is a faith that never gives up, it never quits, and it never leaves. It is the kind of faith that's going to inspire other people. And God desperately needs the world to be inspired by his church. And when the church just says, I don't want that, I don't seek a loving God when I'm going through tough times, we are not going to be impactful on the world because we don't have a story that inspires anybody. Does your life inspire other people, or you give up? Like I did, jogging. Faith that always gets a yes from God. You run into these people, oh yeah, I prayed to the Lord, he gave it to me. Oh, I needed a parking lot spot, and I just said, Lord, could you get me a parking spot? And it just opened up, the clouds parted, the sun shined, I heard the angels cry, woo! And you just want to smack them. And hopefully they'll turn the other cheek and you can smack that side too. Faith that always gets a yes from God, those people don't inspire you. Do they? They don't inspire me, right? But when you see someone who gets a no from God, but they still come back and say, I trust him, I love him, I still know he has the best in store for me, that's when you step back and go, wow, you're inspiring. Wow, that's the kind of faith that I'd like to have. That's the kind of faith that is impressive, right? James says, when the bottom falls out of your life, when things get tough, before you quit, before you leave, before you run away, before you give up, consider the possibility that God is up to something good in your life, and it's called persevering faith. He wants you to have a persevering faith. It's a faith that will get you through no matter what you're going through. It's a faith that gets you to the good times, even though you're in the bad times right now. It's the kind of faith that brings the most honor and glory to God. It is the kind of faith that inspires other people. And it's the kind of faith that will ultimately get you to a better place. And then James says this, let perseverance finish its work. He's like, please. You know, in other words, God's at work, and before you hit the eject button, before you hit the divorce button, before you hit the cheat button, the alcohol button, the drug button, you know, whatever button you got, the runaway button, before you hit that button, let perseverance finish its work. Don't run away. Don't leave. Stick around. Hang in there. You can do it. It's inspiring when we run into those kind of folks, doesn't it? And some of you are thinking, wow, preacher man, I don't like this sermon. This is not uplifting. My wife says, why don't you do some more uplifting sermons? I don't know why. But it's like, hey, do you have something else I can do besides that? You know, can I get a persevering kind of faith without going through all the bad stuff, you know? How about this, preacher? How about I promise that I'll tithe regularly? I know I haven't been doing that as much as I should. How about I promise I'll come to church at least 3 or 4 Sundays a month, and I'll try to read my Bible. People would much rather do that than have to go through trials that build up a persevering faith that will inspire people, right? We don't want that. Here, I mean, coming to church, tithing, all that's good, and I appreciate it. But it's not going to produce what he would say is a mature, complete, lacking nothing kind of faith. He says, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature, complete, and not lacking. All this other stuff you do and I do, it doesn't produce that. Here's the truth. The Christians that impress you the most, that impress me the most, are not the ones that have perfect behavior. You know who I'm talking about. We run into them all. They're just so good. They're so good. They're kind of sickening sometimes. You're like, really? You've never? No, I've never done that. Really? Never tried? Nope, never tried it. Wow. You always? Yes, I always. Wow. I mean, I appreciate the morality. But the more you get to know, typically, this is just a typical thing. These people, often you find that they've had a pretty good life. You know, I'm not going to say they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, but they've had a good life. Not a lot of struggles, got into the school they wanted to go to, parents got them a car when they were teenagers, you know, got everything paid, got a good job, and they're going, yeah, man, you know, I don't do that. Wow, you're just not impressed. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you, but you're not very inspiring. You don't inspire me. You see, the Christians that impress you the most, impress me the most, are the Christians that have persevered through the most horrible circumstances imaginable. The stories when you hear, it's like, oh man, I don't know how I would have got through that. How did that family get through that? How did that person get through that? I mean, these are the people that impress you the most. The people that have persevered. They did not give up. They still love God. They still have a faith in God. They still talk about God like he's unbelievable. They want to share God with everybody they run into. And you go, yeah, but that happened to you. And they go, I know. And I wish that would happen to no one else. But it did happen to me, and I'm here to tell you that God still loves me, still cares about me, and it's produced something in me that will live with me for eternity. And I've used it to share with other people that have gone through similar things that I've gone through, and I've lifted them out of the darkness. And I'm afraid, I hated to go through it, but if I'm there now to lift somebody else up, it was worth it to that other person. Who would want that? But they're so impressive, aren't they? When you run into them, you're like, OMG, right? Oh my God. I'm glad that somebody could go through what you went through and come out the other side still praising and loving God. I'm not sure I could have done that, right? You hear these stories. I'm not sure I could have gone through that and come out like you have. Do you know why those stories are so moving and inspiring to us? Because that person allowed perseverance to finish its work in their life. You have just met a mature, complete, not lacking anything kind of believer. Some of you are in the valley of the shadow of death right now, right? That's what you feel like. And you're like, James, what can I do? I don't feel like there's anything I can do. I just got to sit here and take it. And James says you could do this. He says, if any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God. Talk to God. He'll give you that wisdom generously to all without finding fault. It'll be given to you. I don't know, you know what those prayers sound like, don't you? Again, they're rated R prayers. It's like, God, what are you doing? Right? I need some wisdom bad because I don't get you. This makes no sense. I've got an anger. I know it's not at you, but I feel like I should direct it at you, but I know I shouldn't. We're just back and forth, and we don't know how to pray to God. We're just mad, and we're angry. And we say, God, I need your help to see what you're trying to do because I don't see it, right? We prayed those prayers. I don't see what you're doing. James says, pray for that wisdom. Pray to see how God sees things. Pray for it. Pray for it. Then James would say this, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Because the one who doubts is like a wave on the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. Right? You have to believe that God is up to something. There's a foundational thing you have to believe in God. That God has so loved the world that he's given his only begotten son for you, for me. If he's willing to go to that great of lengths, don't you think he's so in love with you and he wants the best for you? You got to hang on to that truth or you're not going to get through this world. You got to get through the truth that God is so in love with you. You got to believe that. You can't have doubts about that. God is up to something in your life. I don't know what it is. There's nobody out there who can tell you what it is. You got to pray for God to open your eyes and give you some wisdom. You have to believe that God's got a bigger plan. And maybe we don't always get to know what it's about. I love the part that he uses you'll be like a wave on the sea blown and tossed by the wind. I don't know if you know this, but James would get to know Peter, the first disciple, pretty good. You remember Peter, Jesus' first disciple. He was a fisherman, loved being out on the sea, in the boat, was a real seaman. But there's a story, and I'm sure it's been relayed to James after, for 30 years he's been working with Peter. where Peter and Jesus, they're out. Jesus is walking on the water. Remember that story? And Peter decides, hey, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get out of the boat. I'm going to walk over to Jesus. And he's looking at Jesus, but then he starts noticing the waves of the sea. He sees the wind. He sees everything's being tossed about. And he takes his eyes off Jesus, and he begins to sink. And he says, Jesus, you got to save me. And Jesus pulls him up. James knew that story. And James wrote this illustration down. And I'm sure Peter might have got a glimpse of his letter. He says, are you really going to put that story in there, James? He says, it's a great illustration, Peter. It's a great illustration. If you take your eyes off Jesus, you're going to lose focus. Right? And that's going to help to undermine your faith. No matter what you're going through, no matter what your circumstances, keep your eyes on Jesus Christ, who so showed his love for you. Don't forget it. Let perseverance finish its work. When the bottom drops out, you didn't deserve it, right? When things change in your life and it wasn't your idea for those things to change. When you get that phone call or that text and suddenly your life is upside down, James says, don't assume the worst. Don't assume that God has abandoned you. Do not assume that God doesn't care about you. He cares infinitely about you. James says, I want you to consider to let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete and not lacking anything. Because when you are complete and mature and not lacking anything in Christ, there's nothing to fear in this world. And you will face everything head on, knowing that you're serving a great and loving God. That's the message today from the little brother of Jesus, who did life with him, who started out thinking, I think there's something off with my brother, right? He left the family. But something changed for James. He saw his brother alive. And that should give us all hope every single day that Jesus Christ is alive. He did not die. And he's available to anyone in this room, whether you're going through a tough time or not. He's the answer to life. He said, he told his disciples, I'm here so that you can have life and have it to the full. So would you stand up with me today, Leanne? We're going to sing or she's going to have to sing most of it, right, Leanne? We're going to follow her along. That's a lot of words. But if you have a decision you want to make, if you want to come and say, I want to make Jesus my Lord, you know, you can come and do that or pray, whatever you want to do today. It's up to you.
I see the works of your hands, galaxies spinning a heavenly dance. Oh God, all that you are is so overwhelming. I hear the sound of your voice, all at once is a gentle and thundering noise. Oh God, all that you are is so overwhelming. I delight myself in you, captivated by your beauty. I'm overwhelmed by you. God, I run into your arms, unashamed because of mercy. I'm overwhelmed by you. I'm overwhelmed by you.
Thank you, Leanne. Beautiful. Don't be overwhelmed this week. Be overwhelmed with God. That's the only thing we need to be overwhelmed with, what he's got in store for you in your life. Y'all have a great week. Who's playing football today? Anybody know? When does Dallas play? Anybody know that? Next year.